Today we're talking about Aeroplan, and a change that quietly rewrote the rules with hardly anyone noticing. But if you've been collecting Aeroplan points, planning Aeroplan redemptions, or just dreaming of a big trip, you need to hear this. Because Aeroplan recently made a massive change to how a bunch of flights are priced, and that single shift is having enormous consequences. So in this video, I'm going to explain exactly what changed, who it affects most, and how to protect yourself so you don't waste thousands of Aeroplan points without even realizing it. By the way, I'm Jordan, and I've been helping Canadians optimize their Aeroplan points for more than 10 years. But this most recent change is a big one, so let's dive in. Aeroplan used to follow a system that made sense, where the number of points you needed was tied to how far you were flying, and their static, predictable reward chart made it easy to plan. Short flights cost fewer points, and long-haul trips followed predictable bands. You could even work backward from a destination and know exactly how much you needed to save. And before the change, most Aeroplan airline partners followed a fixed chart, with a few exceptions like Emirates and Fly Dubai. For example, flights under 500 miles cost 6,000 points in economy. Business class tickets under 2,000 miles cost 20 to 25,000 points. You could look up your route, find its distance band, and book with confidence because the number didn't change. But earlier this year, Aeroplan quietly rolled out an update that moved several of its airline partners into a different pricing model. So unless you were watching closely, you probably missed it. United Airlines, Etihad Airways, and a few regional Canadian carriers now join Emirates and Fly Dubai in no longer following the fixed award chart, and they've been grouped into a new tier called Air Canada and Select Partners, which sounds harmless on the surface, but underneath it means every one of those redemptions now uses dynamic pricing. And that shift changes everything, because instead of knowing what a flight will cost based on distance, you're now shown a starting price and a so-called median, neither of which guarantees anything close to what you'll actually pay. The new chart might list a short flight at 6,000 points or show a business class route starting at 35,000, but those numbers are just placeholders. The real price depends on the route, the date, and how much Aeroplan thinks it can charge in that moment, and there's no upper limit. And while unofficial limits were often exceeded before, now there isn't even a ceiling on paper. And within North America, the impact is already clear. A sub 500-mile economy flight that used to cost 6,000 points now frequently shows up over 10,000, a major increase for travelers who are used to consistent pricing. But it doesn't stop there. Flights between North America and Europe that once sat at 60,000 points in business class are now trending toward 200,000 or more, especially during peak periods. The most misleading part is how these changes are presented. Aeroplan uses words like starting at and median, but those phrases are designed to make it sound like the old system still exists in spirit. In reality, starting at means rarely available, and median just reflects what people happen to pay over the past year, not what you'll see when you search. It's a system that appears familiar, but behaves entirely differently once you try to use it. But what makes this shift even more dangerous is that it removes your ability to plan. Because under the fixed chart, you could map out redemptions months in advance and budget your points accordingly. But now, you're dealing with numbers that change based on time, demand, and hidden algorithms with no warning and little consistency. But that kind of unpredictability isn't just inconvenient, it breaks the core value of a loyalty program. The idea that if you stay loyal, you'll be rewarded with something you can count on. But that trust is exactly what's being undermined, because now, Aeroplan can change the cost of a redemption in real time without ever needing to announce a formal devaluation. They've already done it once, and there's nothing stopping them from doing it again, not just for partners, but eventually for every redemption that falls under this so-called flexible pricing model. So the real question becomes, who feels these changes the most, and who gets hit first when the system stops playing fair? Well, the answer isn't who you'd expect. It's not the casual travelers or the budget-conscious flyers who get hit hardest by dynamic pricing. It's the strategic planners, the people who used to game the system most effectively under the old rules. And here's why. Under fixed award charts, knowledge was power. So if you understand routing rules, distance calculations, and seasonal patterns, you could extract massive value from your Aeroplan points. You could book a round-the-world trip for fewer points than 2 separate long-haul flights. You could use stopovers to visit 3 cities for the price of 1. The system rewarded expertise. But dynamic pricing flips that advantage on its head. Now, the more you know about optimal redemptions, the more likely you are to find those redemptions priced out of reach. Because the algorithm specifically targets high-value bookings because it's able to identify them. A complex routing that saves 40,000 points under the old system might now cost 60,000 points more because the system recognizes that value. And business travelers face a different but equally problematic reality, because they need specific flights on specific dates, which makes them perfect targets for demand-based pricing. So what used to be a perk, having the flexibility to choose any flight, now backfires backfires when the system charges more because they need that specific option. Meanwhile, leisure travelers who book far in advance and remain date flexible can still find reasonable redemptions. They're working with the system's incentives rather than against them. But this creates a two-tier loyalty program, where your travel patterns determine your access to value, not your loyalty or status level. And families saving for a big trip get hit even harder, because when you're booking for 4 or 5 people, even a small increase per ticket adds up really fast. A 5,000 point jump per person means losing 20,000 points in one go, often without warning. There's no email or notice, just a quiet change that can destroy months of planning. And even experienced credit card holders aren't safe. Many of us have been sending our Amex, RBC, or BMO points into Aeroplan for years, assuming that their value would hold. But if those same people haven't checked Aeroplan's reward chart lately, they might not realize what they've lost until it's too late. Because once the points are transferred, they're locked in. And international redemptions are no exception. A dream trip that once cost 75,000 points might now cost 100,000 or more. And if you're connecting from a smaller city, every leg of that journey likely costs more than it used to. And that compounds fast, especially when the chart gives no explanation beyond dynamic pricing. And then there's a whole group of new users who don't even know there's anything wrong because they've never seen the old system. They'll look at a one-way business class flight priced at 90,000 points and assume that that's normal. They won't know those same flights once cost much less. So they'll earn, save, and redeem under the illusion that this was always the deal. So whether you've been in the game for years or just joined in the last month, this change cuts deep, because when point values lose their stability, every redemption becomes a question mark, and if you don't adjust quickly, you're the one paying the price. And now that Aeroplan has changed the rules, the way you use your points needs to change too. This doesn't mean your points are worthless, but it does mean you need to be more careful and more strategic. Because if you want to keep getting strong value, you need to focus on what still works and avoid the stuff that doesn't. So the first thing to know is that not all airlines were affected by this change. Even though some partners now use dynamic pricing, others still follow the original fixed chart, and that's where most of the value lives today. Airlines like ANA, EVA Air, Lufthansa, and Singapore Airlines still price the rewards based on how far you fly, not how much the cash ticket costs or how many people are searching for it that day. This means you can plan a trip in advance and know roughly how many points you'll need. No surprises, no guessing. And that's a big deal, because let's say you're booking a flight that's 4,000 miles long. If it's on one of these fixed chart airlines, you can look up your route, see the distance, and know what the price will be in points. So whether you book today or next month, the number should be consistent as long as the seat is available. And so this gives you something you can actually plan around, and for anyone trying to save up for a big trip, that stability is a lifesaver. But now we move on to the trickier part, which is understanding how dynamic pricing works and what those numbers really mean. When you search for a flight that uses dynamic pricing, like United, Emirates, or Air Canada, then you'll see two values in the chart: a starting at price and a median price. And this setup looks like the old fixed chart, but it works completely different underneath. The starting at number is just a minimum, and it's usually a fantasy. You might see a short flight starting at 6,000 points, or a business class seat starting at 35,000. But when you actually try to book, those numbers almost never appear. The lowest price is technically possible, but only if the demand is extremely low, the seat is unpopular, or you book months in advance. So for most real-world bookings, that number is irrelevant. So the more useful number is the median, which is the median of what other people paid over the past year. And that gives you a better idea of where prices usually land. But even it isn't fully reliable, because prices change daily based on how many people are booking, what time of year it is, and how close you are to your departure date. So even if the median says 45,000 points, you might still see a flight listed for 70,000, especially if demand is high. So the key takeaway is this: don't rely on the numbers in the chart. They're not a promise, they're just a rough estimate. So if you're planning a trip, always search the actual flights, check multiple dates, and see what the real prices are before you move any points or finalize your decision. Because in a dynamic system, the chart is just marketing. The real price is whatever the algorithm decides when you hit search. But now let's talk about why flexibility is your biggest advantage in this new system. If you're locked into specific dates, specific routes, or a tight schedule, then you're going to have a harder time, because dynamic pricing punishes inflexibility. The algorithm knows when most people want to travel: holidays, weekends, last-minute work trips, and that's when prices surge. But if you're willing to shift your travel by a few days, fly at off-peak hours, or choose a different route, then you can still find solid redemptions. It's not about luck. It's about playing the game on easy mode instead of on hard. Now, this also means that if you're trying to book a trip using points, don't search for just one day. Search around it. Check a few days earlier or later. Sometimes moving your flight by just 24 hours can save you tens of thousands of points. And if you're flexible on your destination, then that helps even more. One city might be extremely expensive, while another city nearby is much cheaper, even if both of them are the same distance away. So the more options you give yourself, the better deal you'll get. But flexibility isn't just about your travel dates and destinations. It's also about how you earn and hold your points. If your points are already in Aeroplan, then you're stuck playing by their rules. But if your points are sitting in a more flexible program like American Express membership rewards, RBC Avion, or BMO rewards, then you've got a lot more control, because these programs let you transfer to different airlines, not just to Aeroplan, and that makes a big difference. And this changes how you should think about your long-term point strategy. In the past, Aeroplan was a no-brainer for Canadian travelers. You earned the points, followed the rewards chart, and booked your flights. But now that so many flights are being priced dynamically and the value can change at any moment, you need to think differently. Your goal is to collect points that give you options, because at the end of the day, loyalty programs are still a business, and if the rules are getting more unpredictable, the only way to protect yourself is by staying flexible. Because at the end of the day, loyalty programs are still a business, and if the rules are getting more unpredictable, the only way to protect yourself is by staying flexible, both in how you travel and in how you earn. So now you've seen how Aeroplan changed the rules, and how those changes are quietly reshaping the value of every point you've ever earned. But knowing the risks is only half the story, because if you want to make your Aeroplan points go further, you need to understand how the system truly works. So if you want to avoid the mistakes so many Canadians make and start using your Aeroplan points in a much smarter way, watch this video next. It's my complete breakdown of how Aeroplan works, from earning points to redeeming them and everything in between. I'll see you there.